There is a painful pattern many people quietly experience in their relationships. They find themselves deeply drawn to someone who barely gives them attention. They send messages and wait for replies that take hours, sometimes days. They replay conversations in their mind, wondering if they said something wrong. They analyze every small interaction, hoping it means something more. And despite feeling anxious, confused, or even hurt, they keep chasing. If you've ever asked yourself, "Why am I so attracted to someone who doesn't seem to care about me?" You're not alone. This pattern is far more common than most people realize. And the reason behind it isn't weakness, desperation, or lack of intelligence. The reason is psychology. To understand why people chase those who ignore them, we need to look deeper at how the human brain processes attention, validation, and emotional connection. Because the truth is, the chase rarely begins with logic. It begins with a feeling. At first, the person might seem intriguing. Maybe they're confident, mysterious, or hard to read. They don't reveal everything about themselves immediately. That uncertainty creates curiosity, and curiosity quickly turns into emotional investment. But, something interesting happens when their attention becomes inconsistent. Sometimes they respond warmly. Sometimes they disappear. Sometimes they seem interested. Other times they seem distant. This unpredictability, it triggers one of the most powerful psychological forces in human behavior: intermittent reinforcement. Intermittent reinforcement occurs when rewards appear randomly rather than consistently. And, strangely enough, this makes the reward far more addictive. Think about slot machines in casinos. You don't win every time. In fact, you lose most of the time. But the occasional win keeps people playing. Relationships can unintentionally create the same psychological loop. When someone gives attention occasionally, but not consistently, each moment of affection feels extremely valuable. The brain begins to chase those moments. Each small sign of interest feels like a victory. A message reply becomes exciting. A compliment feels powerful. A brief moment of closeness feels meaningful. And because those moments are rare, they become emotionally amplified. Over time, the mind begins focusing less on the long periods of distance and more on the small bursts of connection. This is how the chase begins. But intermittent reinforcement is only part of the story. Another powerful factor is validation. Human beings have a deep psychological need to feel chosen, valued, and desired. When someone gives us consistent attention, that need is satisfied quickly. But when someone seems distant or selective with their attention, the desire to gain their approval can grow stronger. Why? Because the brain interprets their attention as something scarce, and scarcity increases perceived value. If someone treats their attention like it's rare, your mind may begin to see it as more meaningful than it actually is. You might start thinking, if I can get this person to truly like me, it must mean something. Suddenly, their approval begins to feel like proof of your worth. But when self-worth becomes tied to someone else's validation, the emotional stakes rise dramatically. Every ignored message feels personal. Every delayed response feels like rejection. And every moment of attention feels like relief. This emotional roller coaster keeps people hooked. Another layer of this pattern often comes from early emotional experiences. Many psychologists believe that our childhood relationships shape how we experience love and attachment later in life. If someone grew up receiving inconsistent emotional attention from caregivers, their brain may have learned that love involves uncertainty. Maybe affection was sometimes warm and supportive. Other times it was distant or unavailable. As a child, you might have learned to work harder for attention, to become more observant, more helpful, or more accommodating in order to maintain connection. Those strategies helped you adapt, but years later they can quietly shape your romantic relationships. When you encounter someone emotionally distant, something feels strangely familiar. Not necessarily comfortable, but recognizable. Your mind knows how to navigate this dynamic. It knows how to chase. And sometimes familiarity is mistaken for attraction. You might interpret the emotional tension as chemistry. But what you're actually feeling is a pattern your nervous system learned long ago. There is also a powerful psychological phenomenon known as the challenge effect. When something feels difficult to obtain, it can appear more valuable. If someone is highly available and openly interested, the interaction feels simple. But when someone seems distant, unpredictable, or emotionally guarded, they may appear more intriguing. Your mind starts thinking, there must be something special about them. The difficulty of gaining their attention becomes part of their perceived appeal. But this perception is often an illusion. Difficulty does not equal value. Sometimes it simply means incompatibility. Another reason people chase those who ignore them is, well, hope. Hope can be both powerful and honestly a bit dangerous in relationships. When someone occasionally shows kindness, vulnerability or affection, it can create the belief that, a deeper connection is possible. You might think they just need time, or maybe they're afraid of getting hurt, or even they'll open up eventually. These sorts of interpretations allow you to focus on the potential of the relationship rather than its current reality. But you see, potential is not the same as consistent behavior. Healthy relationships are built on reliability. Respect, communication, and emotional presence appear regularly, not just every now and then. When someone repeatedly ignores your needs or withdraws emotionally, it often reflects their capacity, priorities, or compatibility, not your worth. But when you're caught in the cycle of chasing, that perspective becomes, difficult to see, because the mind becomes focused on solving the puzzle. You start analyzing their behavior. Why did they respond quickly yesterday, but not today? Why did they seem warm last week, but distant now? What changed? The search for answers keeps your attention locked on them. And the more time you spend analyzing, the more emotionally invested you become. Ironically, this investment can deepen the attachment even when the relationship itself remains, really, quite shallow. Another hidden reason behind chasing is, fear of rejection. This might sound a bit contradictory at first. Why would someone who's actually afraid of rejection pursue someone who might just reject them? The answer, really, lies in control. If you're chasing someone emotionally unavailable, the rejection often happens slowly and, ambiguously. There's always that chance things might improve. But if you pursued someone who was emotionally open and interested, the stakes would feel quite different. Because then the relationship could become real. And real relationships, well, they carry the possibility of deeper vulnerability. For some people, chasing distant partners creates emotional drama without requiring full emotional exposure. It feels intense, but it also keeps real intimacy just slightly out of reach. In this sense, the chase can sometimes act as a protective strategy. It allows someone to experience attraction and excitement without fully risking their heart. But eventually, the emotional cost becomes, quite clear. Chasing someone who ignores you slowly erodes self-esteem. You begin, perhaps, questioning your worth. You wonder if you're not interesting enough, attractive enough, or even valuable enough. But the truth is far simpler. Someone's lack of attention often reflects their own circumstances, priorities, or emotional availability. It is not a measurement of your value as a person. Breaking this pattern requires awareness. The moment you recognize the psychological forces involved, the dynamic begins to lose its power. You start seeing the difference between attraction and emotional conditioning. You begin noticing how intermittent attention affects your emotions. You realize how easily the mind can confuse difficulty with desirability. And perhaps most importantly, you begin redefining what healthy connection looks like. Healthy relationships rarely feel like constant puzzles. They don't require endless analysis. They don't create cycles of hope and disappointment. Instead, they feel surprisingly simple. Two people communicate. They respond to each other. They show interest consistently. This consistency may not produce the same emotional highs and lows as the chase, but it creates something far more valuable: security. Security allows you to relax. You don't feel the need to perform for attention. You don't feel anxious about every interaction. You don't wonder where you stand. Instead, you experience something many people mistake for boredom: stability. And stability is the foundation of lasting connection. When you begin valuing stability over intensity, your attraction patterns may start to shift. People who once seemed exciting may begin to feel, a bit exhausting. And people who once seemed, too easy may actually start to feel quite refreshing. But honestly, this shift takes time, because the brain often needs to unlearn old emotional associations. It needs to realize that love does not require chasing, that attention should not feel like a reward you have to earn, that connection should not depend on solving emotional puzzles. Real attraction can still exist without emotional chaos. Real chemistry can still exist without inconsistency. And real love, when it appears, rarely hides behind silence or distance. So, if you ever find yourself chasing someone who constantly ignores you, pause for a moment. Ask yourself a simple question. Am I attracted to this person, or to the challenge of being chosen by them? The answer may reveal more than you expect, because sometimes the strongest pull towards someone has very little to do with who they are, and everything to do with what their attention represents. But once you understand that pattern, something powerful happens. You stop chasing people who treat your presence like an option, and you start recognizing the value of those who treat it like a priority. Not because they're perfect, not because relationships become effortless, but because mutual attention creates the foundation for something far more meaningful than the thrill of the chase. It creates connection. And connection, when built on consistency and respect, is far more powerful than the temporary excitement of trying to earn someone's attention. Because the truth is simple. The right people won't make you chase them endlessly. They'll meet you halfway. And sometimes that quiet willingness to meet in the middle is the clearest sign of genuine interest you'll ever find.